A little over a year ago, I got this 46SX computer from a thrift store. Since then, I've fried the CPU and got a new one, and that's about all I've put on YouTube. So I'm going to go over all the upgrades slash downgrades that I've done to this machine since I bought it. First of all, the quote-unquote upgrades that I have done is put a smaller hard drive in here. This one specifically is a Connor. It's a 240 megabyte hard drive, and I think it's more error correct than the Western Digital Caviar I had in there. It had some issues, well, more like the BIOS had some issues with the hard drive. A lot of the 486 BIOSes only supported about 400 or 502 megabytes of hard drive space, so anything larger than that being used will cause sector errors in DOS. So you couldn't use anything over like 500 megabytes, so I had to partition my Western Digital Caviar to 500 megabytes to make it work, which is half a drive wasted, and that kind of bothered me. Also, I just like having error-correct hardware. That's much more correct, I guess. This drive cost me about 20 bucks, and it has no bad sectors, and it sounds just fine. The spindle is actually pretty quiet for an old drive like that. No bad sectors, as you can see here. I did have some errors in my FAT, but I got that fixed before I showed you this, because I've been messing around with drivers and shit, and I guess it just didn't appreciate that very much. And what kind of hard drive purchase would be complete without the obligatory spin up and spin down sounds? I also find Connors to be more of a popular choice in hard drives around that time, being that they were cheap and they were fairly reliable, so I don't expect this thing to fail anytime soon, but you know what happened to the other Connor in my other video, so you never know. You never know with this old hardware, but I find it extremely intriguing to see it working. Another upgrade is the IDE cd-rom drive that I actually got working on this machine, so I can use it to put CD-ROMs into the drive and copy things. So it's a lot less hassle than getting the whole hard drive out, putting it in a newer computer, and then just copying stuff on it. It's actually the same exact CD-ROM drive that I've had in this Pentium MX for ever since like 98 or whenever the fuck we got that thing. The only downside is that it's a little bit newer than the computer, but it will happily read burnt discs, as you can see right here. That also allowed me to install Windows 3.11 onto this computer. It's technically able to run Windows 95, but that's a little bit ridiculous with this computer, I'd say. You leave that to the Pentiums. It's a little bit slow even on 3.11 sometimes, but yeah. So we can also install some cool games like The Incredible Machine using the CD-ROM drive. So after a sped up install and spending about 10 minutes figuring out why I couldn't get sound until I realized that the game was muted from the options and me getting angry, you can finally play The Incredible Machine. Another cool little mod thing I did there is install a CMOS battery, which is basically 3 AA's soldered to each other and connected with a floppy disk connector onto the motherboard. And I cleaned up some of the corrosion that the last owner left when he tried to do his own little CMOS battery, which sucks, but whatever. Also, this computer still doesn't have any L2 cache, which I need to get on sometime. Make it a little bit faster, get 256K up in there. That'd be really nice. And now I arrived at the biggest upgrade I did to the system, which is to install a 486DX2 66 MHz CPU, which is probably one of the better 486s out there. I'm going to do a little benchmark to see how it compares to the old 33 MHz 486 CPU. First off, I guess we can do a little boot speed comparison, but by the end of this little clip you'll realize there isn't much difference between a 66 MHz and a 33 MHz 486 when booting. I'm guessing this is more of a system board slash disk operation than anything. So the 66 MHz CPU beats out the 33 MHz by 1 second, if you can even call it that. So next up we're going to do the Doom Time Demo 3, which everybody tends to use as a comparison of older hardware, I guess. We're gonna do a little bit of skipping here to be fair to the 33 megahertz, but I'll show you the FPS, which is done by a little calculation. I think it's like the game ticks times 35 divided by the real ticks or something like that gets you the frame rate. I guess this is due to how many frames per second the demo is recorded at. But the 66 megahertz gets 21.1 frames per second, and we're gonna skip ahead a little bit here. I mean, like, say about 25 seconds or so, or no, more than that. It's gonna be a while. We gotta skip ahead for the 33 megahertz. It's kind of slow. That gets a 14.1 frames per second, so that's a little bit of a increase. And last is Tyrion. There's no built-in benchmark for Tyrion or anything like that. So what I'm doing is just starting the game at the exact same time and seeing which one gets to the boss first, because if it doesn't get to the boss first, that means there's been slowdown. I'm going to skip ahead here in a little bit, but also to be fair to both systems, I'm going to cut out the same amount of time, obviously, so that not one has an advantage due to my stupid editing skills. So right here we're about to skip, and you can see that the 46 DX2 66 megahertz is quite a bit further ahead than the 33 megahertz. This is run on the high setting for the graphics, by the way. And also it's running a Sound Blaster 16. I tried running an AWE32, but with the the 64. With an AWE 64, I found the 66 megahertz to even slow down quite a bit with the high graphics, so I just left the Sound Blaster 16. So they're both running a Sound Blaster 16. And of course, the 66 megahertz CPU reaches the boss first. The 33 megahertz is quite a bit behind there. It's not really that noticeable from the video. Obviously, YouTube videos have their limits on frame rates, and my camera's pretty terrible. But it's very noticeable when the 33 megahertz CPU slows down on these settings. So over the time that I've had this machine, I've spent about $60 on it. $10 from getting it from the store, $20 for the DX2 upgrade. What else is there? Like $5 for the cd-rom. Just it about adds up to about $60, and I'd say it's about worth it to have a pretty much fully functional 486. But I still need to get some L2 cache in the board. Anyway, that's about it for today. So talk to you later.